And today we're going to talk about governance, which is a really hot topic today, now in the space, because we all see all the arguments that are happening in public and on Twitter, and governance is sort of a way for people to make decisions amicably. So before we really get going, I thought we'd give each of our panelists a chance to introduce themselves. And we have quite a big panel, 5 people. So starting with Jared, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, hello. My name is Jared Tate. I'm the founder of the Digibyte blockchain. I've been in this space for going on 7 years now. Done a little bit of everything, and each day is a new adventure, so happy to be here.
My name is Joel Monegro. I'm a partner at a venture capital firm called Placeholder that I started with my partner Chris Berniski, who's also at the conference, and we focus our practice on governance and cryptoeconomics. So this is a topic that we spend a lot of our time thinking about.
I'm Daniel Kraywitz, and I have a show on YouTube called Bitcoin Stuff, so you should all go watch it.
Hi, I'm Marco Peerbum. I'm with the Decred project. I do new systems development, and I actually just launched Politeia, which is our proposal system. So speaking of governance, I've been hacking on it for a while.
My name is Paul Snow. I'm the original architect and largely a developer for Factom, the Factom protocol, one of our sponsors here. I also was involved in creating and running the Texas Bitcoin Conference since 2014. And we just released our governance document in May and have been continually refining it within the Factom protocol to organize all the various parties involved. And so this is our interest in governance.
Well, okay, great. So we only have about 20 minutes to talk, and then we have about 20 minutes of questions and answers. So when we talk about governance, it's hard not to talk about Bitcoin and how all these issues came to be. And like I said, governance is really about how to make decisions about upgrades and how proposals and money are spent in a more democratic way without these infighting and forks. And so to begin with, maybe, Marco, you can tell a little bit about your history at Bitcoin and what made you move to Decred. What was happening in Bitcoin?
So we actually wrote a piece of software called BTCD, or BTC Suite, and it was a full node implementation of Bitcoin, of the Bitcoin protocol in Go. And we dropped it into the community, say, look at this fantastically documented, well-written piece of code, and we did not get the warm welcome we were expecting. Right. So, and that's actually the first time we noticed that there was going to be, that there were powers that be, really, that were trying to not let everybody play as nicely as you would have hoped. So we recognized relatively early on that that was going to be an issue. And if you fast forward a couple of years, now what you see, Bitcoin governance is essentially who has the most mining power, right? So if you have very centralized mining, who's really running the show, right?
Right. And beyond that, I think also with governance, and it's interesting what you said, you felt excluded from Bitcoin development, but does anybody else want to talk more about what happens when governance goes wrong? Daniel?
Okay, well, first of all, governance doesn't mean more democratic. Democracy is actually a really bad system because everybody gets one vote, no matter how dumb they are. So in Bitcoin, what we need is the amount of influence you have is based on how much money you are willing to give up or how much energy you are willing to expend as a miner. So we should not have a democratic system.
Oh, no? Does anybody disagree with that?
Well, I understand, and I believe that creating a system where you have fragmented your representation in the system is important. But just because you're fragmented doesn't mean that you shouldn't earn your position. So one of the things that we did in Factom is we created basically categories where people have weighting in the protocol based on what they contribute. Developers have a certain amount of weight. People running businesses have a certain amount of weight. People that are basically facilitating projects onto the protocol have a certain amount of weight, and then the people running the protocol have a certain amount of weight. So there's not a single way to earn a place in the system. Bitcoin doesn't have that as an option, I don't think.
So just getting back to the problems that happen when there's not a good governance system in place, I mean, there's been a lot of projects that have evolved out of governance problems, like, well, Decred, Bcash, a fork. Ethereum came out of colored coins when Vitalik, they were not open to accepting Vitalik's proposal as well. Maybe Joel, you can talk to about what you look at as an investor in terms of the longevity of a project.
Certainly, and to us, governance is really important because it's the mechanisms that allow you to evolve a system. And when you have a failing governing system or an incomplete governance system, especially in these very decentralized networks, then it can be really hard to grow and then expand. In some cases, it can be arguably a good thing or a bad thing. It's kind of up to the participants of a network to decide where they want to take the network. But for example, what we've seen in Bitcoin is a divide between what certain groups want versus what other groups want, and then no way for those different constituents to negotiate amongst themselves in terms of where they want to take the system. Something like Decred distributes power a little bit more evenly around for example, the miners and the stakers and the core developers and so on. But I think the point made earlier is a really interesting one in terms of what kinds of governance systems we implement, whether democratic systems and other ones. And I think that one of the greatest opportunities we have with this technology is to design more intricate governance systems that are a little bit more measured in terms of who gets a vote and why. So we came from a time when we had to give everyone one vote because voting was very expensive and it's pre-digital networks, and so there was no real effective way to communicate. But now we're able to design systems that are a lot more intricate and precise.
So,
any government system that's not based on what gets mined is a lie.
oh. Okay. Listen, now, Bitcoin has been accused of, well, they just haven't been able to really move forward with upgrades. I mean, we've seen that in terms of SegWit, and there's plenty of other examples too. But, and we talked a little bit about the fallouts associated with poor governance, but does it make sense, well, I mean, if a project is more project-driven, like say Dash, does that make more sense than being ideologically or philosophically driven, like Bitcoin, in terms of the ability to make better governance decisions?
So, coming from my own experience, which is similar to Marco's, kind of how Digibyte came into existence is, I started as a Bitcoin miner in like 2012. When the first ASIC miners started coming out in 2013, I'm like, ooh, this is going to be a problem, right? So one of the things we've done with Digibyte in terms, I guess you could say, governance, is we actually have 5 different mining algorithms. And we're actually working on some very innovative stuff where actually we might implement it where the algorithm changes itself every 10 days. So you basically can't build new ASICs for it, right? We could go, I'm actually speaking to one, we can go more into detail. But I guess the important thing for me is I feel like a lot of, especially Bitcoin, gets a bad rap, in terms of, ooh, there is no governance. But to me, it's like you need to define the term first.
Right.
What do we mean by governance, right?
Okay.
Are we talking just pure technical, or are we talking people? And I think it's obviously kind of a hybrid of both. But from my perspective, in terms of a protocol, Bitcoin as it stands today is definitely the most developed in terms of it's had the most eyes on it. To vet, to verify, and in a way that kind of anarchic chaos is a form of governance because it's, at the end of the day, what actually wins out.
Is that effective? I mean... Well,
it has been. I mean, it's still around. It's still the most dominant blockchain and cryptocurrency out there.
It's been forked off into, and it hasn't...
Well, you got to ask yourself, do we really want a system where there's only one blockchain? Or is this kind of a natural evolution of what should happen?
So that's interesting. So you're saying that Bitcoin's fine. There's no governance problems there at all.
Well, that's why it makes it work. What makes it work
is that everybody's arguing, but you don't think that some of the protocols sort of stagnated? It's not moving forward?
No, not at all. There's a lot of exciting stuff that's been implemented into it.
Does anybody want to counter that?
Okay, so first of all, we do want a system that's based on one blockchain. Because the best form of money is the one that we can all agree on. So what we all need to do is settle on one blockchain and then take over the world with that blockchain.
See, I disagree. That'll never
That's
happen.
easily
Wait,
said.
second,
That's more easily said than done. I mean, that's an
Second.
ideology, right? I mean,
Second.
is that
It's
practical?
a single point of failure.
Proof of work forces you to be efficient with your intelligence. So proof of work forces you to skimp on intelligence. So a network that is trying to make it so that you can do CPU mining is one that's going to have a lower average intelligence. So you need to have a network where people have ASICs, because that forces everybody to be more intelligent.
So he's saying ASICs, but
Well, I don't technically disagree with the argument. So the reality, though, is that there's a lot of ASIC mining, pooling that's going on that gives, certain networks a lot of, these mining pools a disproportionate amount of power within a network. There's some evidence that the biggest mining pools in Bitcoin are colluding, right? And that they are run by the same people.
Right.
I don't think that's healthy for the system.
right. So you disagree with Daniel, and also it's important to note that Decred really implements kind of it's a fork of the Bitcoin blockchain, but they use a combination of proof of stake and proof of work. So the coin holders actually have a decision ability to make choices in the network and the protocol upgrades. Correct?
Yeah, so we are proof of work, proof of stake hybrids, and proof of work does all the great things that proof of work does, and we are big fans and believers in that system. But we did want to be able to keep the miners in check, because miners don't always have the same incentive structure as a stakeholder does, and that's why we wanted to give veto power to the stakeholders.
I'm going to agree with Daniel that the best way to take over the world is one blockchain. I'm going to disagree with Daniel in the sense that the best governance is a benevolent dictator, but it doesn't tend to work because there's no competition. So I think the one chain that rules them all is going to have to continually battle other chains that keep it honest. Otherwise, you have one basket, one set of eggs, and no particular reason for the party that has control to care about problems that are inside their system. So I do think that competition is a good thing, and I don't think a lack of competition.
So in other words, it's nice to have one reserve currency, cryptocurrency, but we need some sort of competition. But are we still talking about governance?
Forks are much better competition than altcoins. So a chain that is going to take over the world is continually in competition with potential forks of itself. But competition from other blockchains with different genesis blocks is much less. The real competition is from potential forks of itself.
I completely disagree with that.
I think the point of governance, though, is to avoid forks and communities splitting apart.
Well, and Daniel, you and I have had this conversation. A fork is in the eye of the beholder, no matter how uncomfortable that might be. That's a pun, guys. Come on, a little laugh, all right? I do think that unbridled competition, both in implementation and function, is necessary to keep all the systems honest. If the second layer solutions of Bitcoin are going to solve all the world's problems, they have to compete against other people that are creating truly novel solutions to solve those problems so that we see what is the best way forward. And that's just it. But I think as far as governance is concerned, I also think it's very, very important that all of the parties that have a vested economic interest in the blockchain have some way to get representation. And I think that the way Bitcoin has been structured to date has not actually succeeded in doing that.
Yeah, I think we can all agree on that. No, he doesn't. Well, that's all right. So here's my last question. I don't know somebody keeping track of the time when we need to move to Q&A. So my last.
You have 5 minutes before.
I have 5 minutes. Okay. So one thing I want to ask is I mean, there's this idea of a totally sovereign blockchain. Is it possible? Is that possible to have a totally sovereign blockchain, for example, where we have smart contracts that control decision-making and manage input and how money is spent?
So I'm going to go say no, because there's humans involved, right? So at one point, somebody's going to have to commit code. Somebody's going to have to agree to run something. So there's always a human element, and we can try to automate it as much as we can, but I'm not sure we can actually fully 100% get there without some sort of greater equalism, if you will, within the human element.
I mean, is there any chance of getting away from some of the horrible infighting that we've seen online?
Well,
No.
No.
Realistically, the most realistic path forward is a world with multiple blockchains that are interoperable,
Right.
that are communicating from one chain to the next chain with specific purposes.
Right.
If competition says that works. I personally don't like squeals. I personally believe that we have to have violent arguments.
Violent.
Well,
Violent.
certainly heated, ongoing arguments in the space. I believe that this is Bitcoin's solution to the problem I raised. The reason that other voices have any influence at all in Bitcoin is because of the large and vocal arguments. I do think, though, and Daniel, you may weigh in on this, I think that the arguments have been stifled by censorship on various parties on all sides, and even coordinated social attacks as opposed to honest argument. And I think our honest argument is where Bitcoin's strength lies.
So just getting back to my question too about, and I don't know if we really answered this, is it better to have a profit-driven project as opposed to one that's ideologically driven? And,
Yeah,
Why not
miners are profit-driven, and that's why their only option is ultimately to do what promotes the health of the network. So, so the arguments on Twitter, there have been groups who are trying to control the conversation online, but ultimately, still what matters is what gets mined. So when people do that, the conclusion you should take from it is that this source of discussion is no longer useful. So you need to find somewhere else to talk to people. And getting online, the purpose shouldn't be making arguments. It should be figuring out who is intelligent and making connections with them. But essentially, the arguments that happen online are all they're not real. They don't really affect the outcome, because the outcome is ultimately what gets mined, and what gets mined is ultimately what is valuable for the network.
let me ask you guys this: what about Blockstream and their influence over Bitcoin?
They don't like miners. That makes them evil.
Well, so actually, I think that's a real issue that Decred actually tried to address, and that is that if you have a group of developers and they get swooped up by a single corporation, there's going to be a corporate agenda. That's just the way it is, right?
Can you just tell us what Blockstream is for the people?
Oh, so Blockstream is the company that swept in, VC backed, and they swept up most of the Bitcoin developers at the time.
Right.
And I understand this, right? I mean, you have a life to live. You have to eat every now and then, and you have to have some sort of health insurance. So these folks do need to have some sort of company that backs them.
Corporate oversight of,
right,
of the Bitcoin.
But what it did do, though, is it did centralize instead of decentralize these developers. So in the Decred, we have this treasury where we basically pay individuals to work on this so that they can remain independent and retain their independent voice, and still have healthcare and pay for the bills.
Who doesn't want that? Well, listen, I have a feeling we should probably move over to Q&A. I mean, obviously, we just kind of scratched the surface of this kind of really important topic, but Q&A? Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, there's a mic over here in the middle for people that have questions.
There's one out there, yeah. It's Chris.
So I think one of the problems with governance is it's such a big subject that it leads to lots of different definitions, and lots of those definitions are poorly defined. So I would like to hear how the panelists would define governance, maybe starting from the right-hand side and moving over.
Your right or my right?
You go first. My right.
Oh.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. How do you define governance? To me, I guess, being a developer and being, I guess, the purist, I would say at the end of the day, what's actually in the code that's implemented and being distributed across the network. And once that is out there, governing however it is, whether it's through mining, through proof of stake, through master nodes, through, whatever kind of architecture it's out there, the next level of governance is how do you make changes to that? And the simplest definition that I could probably give for that is if 51% of a network agrees to upgrade, obviously you're going to end up with two chains. One goes one way, the other goes the other way. But that's, I think, governance on a blockchain in its simplest form.
So we'll have to move quick here if we want other people to be able to ask questions too.
To me, there's two pillars to crypto networks in general. There's the cryptoeconomics, which is all the stuff around how people get compensated and what the motives are, profit-driven and so on. And governance represents the power to change those rules, ultimately. And as Chris said, the implementation can vary drastically from one network to the next or from one implementation to the next. But ultimately, that's what it means. It's the power to change the system, and then the question becomes, how do you distribute the power to change the system?
Governance is a word that comes from outside of Bitcoin, which people should forget, because it's actually inappropriate in Bitcoin entirely.
Okay.
So I somewhat disagree with that. But actually, to me, governance is a multifaceted thing. So it's not one topic. It is, it is code. It is the human element. It is funding. So there's all these things that encompass, what governance truly is. And the part of the problem is defining it. So not everybody is using the same definition. Mm-hmm. So and actually, the one thing that we did do in Decred is that we are attacking all the facets of what governance could mean, right? So we have it on blockchain, off blockchain. We have systems to have people have, conversations to one another without, devolving into Twitter puppet fights, right?
Right.
So
it goes beyond just conversations on GitHub or Twitter.
I view governance as something that happens whether you like it or not. I do agree with Daniel that it's a term outside of Bitcoin, but it is just how the ecosystem changes, operates, and addresses issues, and it encompasses who has what roles, who has what game theory is applied, and what economic pressures exist. These constitute governance.
Thank you. Oh, no. Anybody else?
I'll add my definition. When I'm looking at governance, I create a BLT sandwich. Business, legal, and technology. And it's easy. A lot of our focus
is this going to be a question, though? You're going to ask a question?
Okay. So I'm really interested in the legal aspects. And maybe someone on the panel would like to address the legal aspects of governance.
We have spent at Factom maybe more than most some efforts, and we took a page from Bitcoin, and the idea is to avoid any kind of legal structure or any kind of component in the protocol that could be drawn into court as representing anything in the protocol. So it's all about how I decentralize decision making, how I decentralize participation in the protocol, and I have a huge penalty over Bitcoin, in that Bitcoin's anchoring provides this for them. I mean, Bitcoin's proof of work provides this for them. We're an anchored system, so there isn't. We're buying our proof of work from Bitcoin and people like Decred. So decentralizing becomes.
So is there a legal aspect to it, Paul?
To the extent that you can decentralize, you avoid the legal aspects.
A legal would mean that there's some kind of a contract with the people that are using the that you're going to give them. Okay, so there's no legal aspect?
We avoid contracts. We avoid legal representations. We avoid any representation that could be implied to be a contract. And what happens is the legal applies to how the protocol is used as opposed to how the protocol is executed.
So actually, I would like to touch on that. So one of the things, and I know this is actually not what you want to hear, but I think this is some of the ideology that actually does exist in the space, is that when we design Decred, what we are trying actively to do is to make the network sovereign. So in other words, there's not a single person or a single throat to choke. So what we're trying to get to is that if you actually do want to sue somebody, you can sue an individual, but you cannot sue the network. There is no corporation. There is no
really
Decred core, you know, in San Francisco. There's no pretty building. It's run by the people for the people.
That is really interesting, yeah.
Proof of work is higher law.
Does anybody else have a question? Come on, this is anything on treasury systems or voting on how funds are spent on a network, or how they know what projects they're going to work on. Go ahead.
I mean, obviously, you know, Decred is all about governance. Are there some other token projects out there where you admire their governance structure and what they're trying to do?
That's a really good question. Yeah. Other projects, Tezos, Dash, Cardano is trying to work on something with governance.
Decred's the best in my mind.
Which one?
Decred is absolutely the best.
Because you have an investment. That's your investment thesis. He's with Placeholder, so.
Well, so again, I think that the first thing to define there is what is governance, right? So what I've seen in this, and let's use Dash as an example. So they have more of a signaling system, right? So they do have an automated contract that pays out, but that is all it is, right? The community signals, this is what we want to do, this is what we want to spend funds on, right? So they do not have on-chain voting to actually change consensus.
Don't the master nodes, though, make a decision? I mean, I think last I read it was like $800,000 to have a master node. Am I right? That you can make decisions on the network. Am I?
But they are signaling decisions. They are not baked into the protocol as if you vote on this, this is going to happen, right? So you cannot bake, a consensus change in there.
I think Factom has the most ambitious governance because of the digital identities and the data keep tracking and the various roles in the system. It necessarily, there are 65 parties, and we're looking at designs to extend that quite a bit, participating in this protocol. And every single block today has more than 20 parties that build components of each block, so that we've distributed the construction of every block across a bunch of parties. So whereas Bitcoin has 3 mining pools that have over 50% of the mining power, we have 21 to 26 parties that split the power of building blocks. So I admire Decred, I admire Dash. I don't think we're quite at the point where I can say we're the best, but I think we're on track to being the best.
Okay, we're just about out of time, but Jared, you want to say something?
Yeah, I think it's important for people to understand there's a complete gamut here. You know, there's a lot of these big projects that are running on a dozen servers, 7 servers, 3 servers, 12 servers, and they're advertised as decentralized, and there's only, a handful of parties here. It's like Paul just said with the mining pools. That's one of the things we wanted to get away with Digibyte and our 5 algorithms. Like, you could take all the Bitcoin mining power in the world, throw it at Digibyte, you only get 20%. And we're working on some innovative stuff there. But, since 2017, we've had over 250,000 full nodes set up, over the course of a year. So we've tried to be as decentralized as possible. And the reality is, I think a lot of these systems, it's like I said, I guess the final point is it's a gamut, it's a spectrum. So it's, obviously we're still trying to work it out as an industry. So it's very much in its infancy.
So also, somebody told me we actually have like 10 more minutes, so I'm just a little, it's 12 now. Mark?
Yeah, 10 more minutes.
10 more minutes, okay, well goody. So, come on, more questions here.
Let's hear those questions.
Let's hit those questions. Come on, there's so many arguments right now about governance,
Well, let's pitch it over to Daniel, because I'd like him to go more in depth on blockchain, Bitcoin, the Bitcoin forks, and how he views this as the superior system of governance across, things like Bitcoin Cash.
What do you mean, Paul?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Let's let Daniel explain what he's saying.
Okay, so. Run away.
Okay,
Go
well,
for it, Daniel.
I'm not sure what the question is.
How are the Bitcoin and the Bitcoin forks providing what you're saying, governance?
Oh, okay. So I think that currently what's going on in Bitcoin is that Bitcoiners are rearranging
their positions relative to one another, and they're learning about how to promote behavior that is more cooperative.
Wait. No, come again?
I think that Bitcoiners are rearranging their positions relative to one another, and they're learning behavior that is more cooperative.
I don't understand that.
Well, yeah, I'm getting.
Forks do that.
So, Bitcoin development was kind of taken over by an agenda that has nothing to do with what is more valuable, what promotes the value of Bitcoin, and that has to do with this company Blockstream that we were talking about earlier, and it has to do with the hegemonic control that the developers had over the standard implementation of Bitcoin, which was Bitcoin Core. So the people in control of Bitcoin Core promoted their agenda while everybody else was kind of behind, having to come up with competition to it. So what ultimately happened is that Bitcoin split into two alternate histories, and there are other forks, but there are two main
But
ones.
how does that?
I'm getting to that.
Okay. I just tried to.
So basically, Bitcoin Cash is the free thinking fork. So first of all, like the value of Bitcoin comes from the network effect, right? So the value comes from all of the people being able to stick together and work together for a common purpose. But if there's one agenda that's in control of development, then people can't do that. So the development has to promote everybody else being able to cooperate with one another. Okay? So Bitcoin Cash came out, and that's sort of like the free thinking alternate history.
I still have trouble following this.
Well,
so Bitcoin splits in two, right?
Yeah, it's
so
forking.
that means that both
that's not a good governance thing because you've got the project splitting off.
Both sides
Am I right?
have the same history. See, so they both. So what I've been recommending people do is being diversified between all the forks. Because to me, that means you are connected to the original community of Bitcoin.
Jared, weigh in.
Well, okay, so you said earlier that altcoins are basically crap, right? Yeah. So I got a statement to make here. So when Bitcoin Cash forked, right, everybody remember how it was like the blocks, there was like hours, days between blocks there?
Yeah.
They literally cloned directly from our GitHub repository to fix this problem because the difficulty bug is still in Bitcoin. So we've been working on this for 4 years outside. We have our own unique Genesis block, but we were able to pioneer a solution that is directly what fixed Bitcoin Cash and the Bitcoin Cash fork.
Yeah,
so I disagree.
You could have made something a lot more valuable if you made a fork of Bitcoin.
I disagree.
What do you disagree with? Because I'm trying to...
Well, okay, so we started with our own Genesis block.
Right.
That's what we're arguing here, right? So just like Marco said, I actually had some ideas that I wanted to submit and propose to the Bitcoin Core back in 2013, 2014, and they basically got ignored.
But making a fork is just a better strategy.
I disagree.
You're creating a competing community that starts from nothing if you do a new Genesis block. But the value of the currency is everybody sticking together. So if you make a fork, that's better. That's more valuable than if you start a whole new community. See, if you make a fork, you're leveraging the community that already exists.
It seems like...
Wait. I wasn't even finished with my story about Bitcoin Cash, though. So the people who were thinking and are creative people were gradually moving into Bitcoin Cash. So that's how Bitcoiners are rearranging.
I think what you're saying is that a fork is a good type of government.
Yeah,
So that's right. So you're saying that is, but there are other people that say that's completely not what we want. We don't want...
Earlier you said you didn't understand what I meant when I said Bitcoiners are rearranging themselves with regard to one another. But that's how they're doing it. Is the people who are creative are gradually moving more into Bitcoin Cash. So now Bitcoin is a new network where the creative and interesting people are centered around Bitcoin Cash, but they are still diversified into the entire Bitcoin system, right? It's not like they have completely sold all of their BTC. So they are still benefiting from the success of BTC, but they are also gradually moving into Bitcoin Cash. And that's the Bitcoiners rearranging themselves with regard to one another.
Okay, it sounds like a fork to me where the community's split off and,
Right,
and
but
it just creates more
eventually-
arguments because...
Yeah, but that's a governance model because...
So your government's
the
model is
people-
it's okay for people to fight and split off and create new projects that
when
compete
people-
directly with that.
If there's more value to be found in people rearranging themselves...
All right.
Right.
What do you think? Because I mean,
Well,
my understanding was that wasn't what governments was about.
Yeah,
but-
well, no, in some sense it is. If you can split off and you can fight with the other people and whoever wins, wins the battle, and where the creative people go, they create the more value and
I mean, there's
whatever.
always that option.
But here's my disagreement with Daniel, and we've gone over it before. I don't see anything magic about the Genesis block or the history of Bitcoin. I don't believe I don't believe that there will ever be one currency or one thing, because there's no technology out there, including social media or including currencies or including governments, where everybody decides, oh, well, this is the right way to do this thing, and so everybody's going to do it the same.
So let me add to that. So some folks are just simply not going to be interested in working on Bitcoin. The end, right? And you can agree or disagree, but that's actually how it actually turns out to, right? So, for example, I did a lot of open source development, and I really like OpenBSD. And people were like, so why are you not developing Linux? I don't care. It's not interesting to me, right? So I work on what I want to work on.
To Daniel's point that forks are a better solution and people will want to join on to the original, Bitcoin. I mean, you could submit Bitcoin Diamond, Bitcoin Gold, Bitcoin Private as things that I would say are not necessarily superior to starting up a new consensus mechanism that might be superior to Bitcoins.
Well, they are superior because they leverage the old community.
Well, and I don't think there's anything golden about the old community. I think that when you bring in new people and new blood, this is also a good thing.
New people should join the old community.
Why? Weren't you just railing on Blockstream for them being sucky and all that? That's the old community.
No, they're the new community. The old community before Blockstream is even better.
Okay, well, we'll leave this as a point of contention in the panel, that whether the value of the old community is something that must be preserved at all costs. I think, for instance, the Ethereum is now beginning to be a pretty old community, in that people have been there for 4 years.
Which one, Ethereum Classic or Ethereum?
Oh, well, it is a competing fork, Ethereum Cash. The Ethereum is going through the same process of governance that Bitcoin has gone through with forks.
Chris Berniski has another question. Chris is with Placeholder as well, so he works with Joel.
So I see the idea of forking as a means of governance really allowing for governance via defection. And so over time, you end up basically isolating yourself to a pool of people who agree with one another because everyone else has left. And so I'd be curious about forms of governance that keep communities together and what we need to keep communities together as opposed to governance by defection.
What we need to keep communities together is miners who are willing to fight hash wars. That will turn out well.
It's not going so
But
well.
because if you show that you are willing to expend extra energy, that means that people are going to be more willing to rally around you.
With
maybe
money
or
right now-
maybe not.
Bitcoin Cash actually, isn't Bitcoin Cash literally the example of that not being the case?
No?
Yes.
Wait, how so? How so? You mean
Maybe.
But as far as I
Thought
know,
I
there
would-
were not
1
miners
minute.
willing to fight.
We have
We
two
have 1 minute
questions.
left. 1 minute
Two
left.
questions.
Let's
Let's
have
do
somebody
it
else.
fast.
Okay, real quick. Name is Richard Payne. I'm not with anybody other than myself. All this talk about proof of stake and all these other things are great, but I've owned Bitcoin for 3 years now, I guess. This magazine, they're still #1. Why would I want to change? I just don't see it.
You don't have to change.
I'm not going to. Yeah.
Well,
you gotta prove it to me first.
Yeah, USD is still #1 as a reserve currency, but if you go look at the history, it's not a given. That's all I would say.
I'm sticking with that too.
Yeah, feel free.
I think we're out of time.
Yeah,
Let's grab one more.
Just to clarify, you said the hash rate control governance or the nodes control governance? Because I thought nodes control the governments
Oh,
of
no,
Bitcoin.
nodes don't mean anything unless you're hashing.
You sure? Because I
Yes.
thought if
This is an argument Bitcoin Core made that the nodes matter. I'm going to agree with Daniel here, and it's hash power that matters.
I think you are completely wrong on that because nodes do play a part in the whole ecosystem.
All decisions are made by miners. If you're a pure proof of work coin, the end. There's nothing in between.
On Bitcoin. Not on.
All the nodes can do is isolate themselves, and it's absolutely true that everybody can isolate themselves from the miners.
Well, miners are also nodes too. Full
Yeah,
nodes.
but the miners hash, and that's to Daniel's point. They hash.
Nodes have write access to the ledger. They are the only ones that have write access to the ledger, and therefore they are the ones who make the
Well,
rules.
if I don't agree on Bitcoin Cash, I just go back to the Bitcoin Core node and still run the node.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, but nodes don't really matter. They're just lying about that.
Why don't we take this
do you
offline?
have a programming
so, yeah,
development
we're gonna have to
background?
We'll take it offline. Come up here. We'll yell at you.
We have also a mining panel tomorrow, if you want to talk more about that. And we're out of time, so everybody give our panelists a good round of applause. Thank you so much.